For decades, Steven Seagal was the face of unstoppable strength, a martial arts icon who blended calm discipline with fierce power. On screen, he fought villains, saved lives, and embodied toughness like no one else in Hollywood. But behind the cameras, away from the spotlight, Seagal's life has taken a heartbreaking turn, one that has shaken even the man known for his unbreakable will. In recent months, whispers began to surface that Seagal was stepping away from public life. At first, fans assumed it was about age, or perhaps fatigue after a career filled with stunts, travel, and controversy. But the real reason runs much deeper and far more painful. His wife, the woman who has stood by him through thick and thin, has received a devastating diagnosis. The news hit Seagal like a lightning strike. For years, he's played heroes who could fix anything. But now, faced with something he can't fight, he's chosen to walk away from the spotlight to focus on what truly matters. Those close to him say he spends his days quietly by her side, offering comfort, prayers, and the quiet strength that made him famous. For a man who has always seemed larger than life, this chapter of Steven Seagal's story is deeply human, a reminder that even the strongest among us are vulnerable to loss and love. Fans around the world are rallying behind him, sending messages of support and gratitude for the years of entertainment he's given. But for Seagal, none of that matters right now. His entire world has narrowed to one purpose: to be there for the woman he loves, no matter what the future brings. This is the emotional truth behind Steven Seagal's goodbye. A farewell not to fame, but to everything except love itself. For more than 4 decades, Steven Seagal built his name on strength, control, and fearlessness. His presence on screen was magnetic, the calm in the chaos, the man who never flinched when danger closed in. But behind that stoic expression and unshakable posture was a man with a deep sense of loyalty, especially to the woman who quietly stood beside him when the lights faded and the applause died away. Her name was Aiko, a graceful woman with a love for peace, nature, and simplicity. Where Steven was intensity and power, Aiko was calm and warmth. Together, they created a balance that few understood. She rarely appeared in public, but those who knew the couple said her influence softened him, grounding the warrior in serenity. Their story began far from Hollywood. It was in Japan, during one of Steven's many returns to his spiritual home. He had gone there to visit an old dojo, a place where he once trained as a young man hungry to master Aikido. Aiko was the daughter of one of his instructors, an artist who spent her days painting mountains and cherry blossoms. When they met, something wordless passed between them, a stillness that spoke louder than any dialogue. Years later, as Steven's fame grew, Aiko became the quiet heart of his world. She stood by him through the wild highs of fame, the controversies, and the exhausting demands of celebrity life. But it wasn't until recently that Steven realized how much her strength truly meant, because this time, she was the one who needed saving. It started small, moments of fatigue, missed meals, and quiet sighs that Steven brushed off as exhaustion. But when the diagnosis came, it shattered the illusion of control that had defined his entire life. Aiko was seriously ill. The doctors spoke carefully, their words landing like heavy stones. For once, the man who had fought countless cinematic enemies found himself powerless. Those close to Steven say he changed overnight. Film offers, interviews, and appearances suddenly didn't matter. The man who once commanded film sets with authority now spent his mornings in silence, making tea for his wife, learning to cook her favorite dishes, and reading beside her in the garden. He had once believed that legacy was built on fame, but now he understood that it was built on love. The press noticed his absence, and rumors began to swirl. But Steven didn't care. He'd made his decision. "This is my final mission," he told a close friend. "Everything else can wait." And so he retreated from the spotlight. His days became simple: morning meditations, quiet walks, hours at her bedside. Sometimes Aiko would smile faintly and whisper, "You used to fight the world. Now you just hold my hand." That's enough, those words cut deep. They reminded him that the strongest moments of a man's life aren't always the loudest. Sometimes strength means surrendering to love, to the fragility of life itself. In their home, the walls are lined with mementos, photos from his earliest films, old swords from his martial arts days, and letters from fans around the world. But what stands out most is a simple frame above their bed, a picture of Stephen and Aiko standing under a cherry blossom tree, smiling like two souls untouched by time. Now, as her condition worsens, Stephen spends each day cherishing the ordinary, the sound of her voice, the touch of her hand, the memory of every laugh they've shared. He has fought countless battles in his life, but this one, this battle of the heart, is the one that has truly tested his soul. The world may see Steven Seagal as the ultimate action hero, but those who know him today see something far greater, a man who has traded his fame for faith, his power for tenderness, and his legend for love. And as the days pass quietly in their secluded home, one truth becomes clear. Even warriors must one day lay down their swords. Days had a rhythm now. The mornings began with the whisper of wind through the shoji doors, the soft clink of porcelain cups, and the scent of green tea drifting through the room. Aiko no longer had the strength to join him in the garden, so Stephen carried the world to her instead. A single blossom, a folded crane, a memory told in a low voice. The illness had begun to move faster. There were good days when laughter returned, and days when even breathing sounded heavy. Stephen learned to measure time not by hours, but by heartbeats. He had spent his life mastering precision, how to control a strike, how to sense danger before it arrived. None of that prepared him for helplessness. At night, he sat beside her bed, replaying the choices that had built his life. The cameras, the fame, the chaos, how small it all seemed now. What mattered were the quiet years they'd shared between films, the evenings in Kyoto when they would walk until the lanterns went dark, the way she'd rest her hand on his arm whenever his temper flared. She had been his balance, his stillness in a world of noise. One evening she asked him to play the guitar again. His fingers trembled on the strings. It had been years. The melody was slow, imperfect, yet beautiful in its honesty. When the final note faded, she whispered, "That's the sound of peace." He smiled, hiding tears. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping gently on the roof. He remembered an old saying from his sensei, "Even the strongest tree bows to the storm, not because it is weak, but because it understands." For the first time, Stephen understood. Strength wasn't resistance. It was devotion. He started writing letters, one each day, to Aiko. Some were memories, others promises. He would leave them on her nightstand even when she was asleep. "For when you wake," he'd say. But deep down, he knew some letters were meant for the days when she wouldn't. The world outside barely noticed his absence anymore. The headlines had moved on, the lights dimmed. Yet in that quiet home, a different kind of story unfolded, one not of violence or victory, but of grace. Aiko's voice grew softer, but her eyes remained bright. "You've spent your life protecting everyone," she said one morning. "Promise me you'll protect your peace when I'm gone." He didn't answer at first. Words felt too fragile. Finally, he nodded. "I promise." It was the hardest vow he had ever made. That night, he stood by the window long after she had fallen asleep. The moonlight cut across the tatami mats, painting the room silver. In the reflection, he didn't see the fighter or the star. He saw a man humbled by love, standing at the edge of something he couldn't control but could still honor. Every breath she took reminded him of why he had walked away from everything else. The world might remember Steven Seagal for his strength, but the truest version of that strength was here, in this small, silent room, where love was the only battle worth fighting. Spring came quietly. The trees outside their home began to bloom, pale pink petals gathering on the path where Stephen and Aiko once walked together. Each morning, he slid open the door and watched the blossoms drift like snow, waiting for the moment when she would stir and smile. But the mornings were slower now, her voice thinner, her hands lighter in his. He had learned to do everything by rhythm: her medicine, her tea, the music she liked to hear when the sun reached the window. Sometimes she slept through it all, her breathing soft and shallow, and he would sit beside her, fingers tracing the lines of an old script that had once made him famous. The hero on the page felt like a stranger now. When she was awake, they spoke little. There was no need. Aiko's eyes still said everything. "I'm here." "You've done enough." On one of her good days, she asked him to take her outside. Wrapped in a blanket, she watched the petals fall. "Do you remember our first walk in Kyoto?" she whispered. He nodded. "You said the wind was teaching us patience." He laughed softly. "And you said patience was just another word for love." That afternoon, she rested her head on his shoulder and slept. The sun moved slowly, and for the first time in months, Stephen felt peace instead of fear. When evening came, the house filled with stillness. The sound of her breath faded into the rhythm of the wind, and he knew her journey had ended. For a long time, he didn't move. Then he took her hand, kissed it once, and bowed his head, the way a student honors a master. Because in truth, Aiko had taught him more about life than any sensei ever could. The days that followed were quiet. He buried her beneath the cherry tree they had planted years ago, a simple stone marking her name. No cameras, no ceremony, just the mountain air and the rustle of leaves. Every morning he brought her a cup of tea and one folded letter. He never read them aloud. They were conversations meant only for her. In solitude, he began to see her everywhere, in the reflection of the pond, in the warmth of the kitchen where she used to hum. And slowly, he understood what she had meant by her final request: to protect his peace. The promise wasn't about forgetting her. It was about living with grace, the way she had lived. He returned to the dojo for the first time in years. His students were older now, but they bowed deeply when he entered. He didn't speak of grief. He simply demonstrated a single movement, a bow that flowed into a breath, then into stillness. "This," he told them, "is strength." When the lesson ended, he stayed behind, watching dust swirl in the sunlight. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the wind carried the scent of blossoms. For the first time, he smiled without pain. The warrior in him would always remain, but so would the man she had shaped, patient, gentle, unguarded. He whispered toward the open door. "I kept my promise." The wind answered softly, as if she'd heard, and in that quiet moment, Stephen realized that goodbye was never truly final. Love, like the cherry blossoms outside, would return every spring. Summer arrived with the sound of cicadas. The dojo doors stood open, and the scent of pine and rain drifted in. Months had passed since Aiko's passing, yet her presence seemed stitched into every breath of the place. Stephen moved slowly through each form, the movements sharper now, not from anger but from clarity. Every strike ended in stillness, every motion folded back into silence. This was how he spoke to her now. Through discipline, through calm. He had thought loss would break him, but it became a teacher. The grief that once felt like a wound began to feel like a pulse, steady and guiding. He started to teach again, though his lessons were different. Gone were the lectures about victory or control. In their place were stories of balance and patience. "Power," he told his students, "is not what you hold in your fist. It's what you let go of." Word spread quietly. People came not just to learn Aikido, but to hear his reflections. They brought their own losses, a parent, a child, a friend, and found comfort in his calm presence. After class, he would pour tea, listen, and remind them that every goodbye carries a seed of return. "You bow," he would say, "and in that bow you promise to rise again." At night, he still visited the cherry tree. The petals had long since fallen, replaced by green leaves that whispered in the wind. Sometimes he read Aiko's favorite poems aloud, sometimes he simply sat in silence. The ache never left completely, but it changed shape. Where once there was emptiness, now there was gratitude. One evening, as dusk turned the mountains purple, a young student approached him. "Sensei," the boy asked, "how do you stop missing someone?" Stephen smiled gently. "You don't," he said. "You learn to let missing them make you kinder." The answer spread through the small community like a mantra. Soon, people began leaving offerings beneath the cherry tree, paper cranes, small candles, folded notes of remembrance. The place became a quiet sanctuary for anyone seeking peace. Stephen never announced it, never claimed it. It simply grew out of the love Aiko had left behind. He began writing again, not scripts or action scenes, but reflections, essays about stillness, devotion, and the unseen battles every soul must face. A publisher friend read them and suggested turning them into a book. At first he hesitated. The words felt too private. But Aiko's voice echoed in his memory. If something you've learned can ease another's burden, then share it. When the book finally appeared, it wasn't a bestseller or a sensation. It was something quieter, a work passed hand to hand, whispered about in meditation halls and dojos. Readers described it as a map through grief, written by a man who had once fought the world and now fought only for peace. The seasons kept turning. Winter came, and snow blanketed the garden where Aiko rested. Stephen placed a lantern beside her stone, its flame flickering against the wind. "You were right," he said softly. "The heart survives the storm." He turned toward the house, the light of the lantern casting his shadow across the snow. It looked different now. Not the silhouette of a warrior ready for battle, but of a man at ease with the world. Inside, he poured 2 cups of tea out of habit. One sat across from him, untouched but waiting, just as it always had. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, scattering a few petals left from the last blossom. And in that simple sound, he felt her answer, gentle, steady, eternal.